Cheers, guys. I'm your host, Epix. This is episode 9 of the VR show, and what a show tonight. We are going to dig deep in the VR chat segment into the RTX lineup of cards. I want to be able to help you answer the question, if I have a high-end card like a 1080 Founders Edition or a 1080 Ti from this last generation, is the upgrade worth it to me? And to help answer that, because the benchmarks have been coming in fast and furious, we are going to look at about half a dozen title benchmarks and a couple of VR benchmarks, which, don't tell the whole story, but help fill in some of the holes. If you've got anything less than a 1080 Founders Edition, providing you have the money, you can't really go wrong with either card, the 2080, the 2080 Ti. Sure, you could wait, for the 7nm stuff that will inevitably be released and some of the other low-end options. But if you do want to kind of get to the front of performance, well, we'll talk about that in the VR chat segment. Also, quite a few games we're going to be looking at today. A couple of games that have added some last-minute awesome features like Creed Rise to Glory, which we'll talk about. But you know where we start things, guys? With the current events VR Roundup segment. So grab a snack and bevy of choice, sit back, chillax, and let's check out the VR Roundup. We know the Santa Cruz will have 2 dual-track 6 Degree of Freedom controllers. We also find out that Google has 2 experimental 6 Degree of Freedom controllers itself. It's going to be sending them out as part of a dev kit to developers. Here you can see the controllers with a Lenovo Mirage Solo. The controllers looking slightly move-ish with 2 spheres at the top end of the units. It appears that tracking is going to be determined by the 2 balls. It's going to be interesting to see if fast wrist action on the shafts will cause ball tracking difficulties. Lenovo has stated the Mirage will be launching with a single 3 Degree of Freedom controller, which has been the standard, but it hasn't ruled out future availability for a 6 Degree of Freedom pair for the device. Walmart is launching a VR training program that will see 17,000 Oculus Go headsets in employee hands for training purposes by the end of this year. The 17,000 will be distributed in groups of 4 to selected Walmart supercenters. A pilot test this summer had employees using the Oculus Go in the form of a training program showing them how to operate the upcoming Walmart pickup towers. Those are part of an initiative for an online ordering program that lets consumers pick online orders at the store in a type of vending machine kiosk. The program kicks off in October and will become part of the staple employee training curriculum. I've said many times that as we move forward, there's going to be attrition in the form of companies not able to survive in the VR market. Well, we've had another such fatality. Company HARDLIGHT VR, a Seattle-based company, they headed a successful Kickstarter campaign raising $147,000 from 349 backers. The company used a proprietary SDK, which is pretty much a death knell if you don't have a high attach rate for peripherals, which they didn't. HARDLIGHT was unable to meet enough volume to support manufacturing of the haptic suit via their third-party manufacturer. They attempted to increase the volume necessary for manufacturing by lowering the price, but that didn't have the desired effect. The company did, however, manage to get 80% of the promised features in most of the backers' hands, failing only to deliver on the last stretch goal, which was a promised wireless component. Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus and one of the individuals responsible for bringing in this latest wave of VR technology, still insists that Facebook buying Oculus was the best thing that ever happened to the VR industry. He goes on to say that the purchase drove billions of dollars in investment into other VR startups. Had it not been for that purchase, VR likely wouldn't be as far along. Valve revealed their updated KNUCKLE EV3 controllers this week, several changes to the older design, including strap adjustment markings, as well as a more comfortable fit, stronger trigger spring, and overall improved assembly of the trigger mechanism, a recessed system button to avoid accidental presses, more consistent grip force sensors, and improved battery life by about 2 hours for a 7 to 8 hour per charge. Valve says it's planning on releasing much greater quantities of the EV3 dev kits based on the success of their previous dev kit, the EVT model. A few days ago, Mozilla launched their made-for-VR browser, FIREFOX Reality, onto the Oculus Go, Lenovo Mirage Solo, and the Vive Focus. The version that they're launching is being called 1.0, but unfortunately still lacks some of the staple features for VR, well, like bookmarks and support for 360-degree videos. Mozilla saying those features will be added in an update shortly. And this, Sony has filed a patent. It was back in 2017, but it's only been made public now. The patent addresses VR sickness using a range of fitted biometric sensors, such as a thermometer, eye tracking cameras, a moisture sensor, and exterior orientation cameras. The idea behind the technology is that it creates a baseline health threshold, and then the software and hardware measure against that to tailor the experiences in real time if discomfort is noted. So it'll be interesting to see how a technology like this works on production units. Very interesting approach to tackling the problem. And in VR games and experiences, upcoming stealth game Espire 1 VR Operative, which is being developed by Melbourne-based Digital Load, has uploaded a teaser trailer. In the stealth game, being described as being very Metal Gear Solid-like in its gameplay approach, players take on the role of being drone operators sometime in the future. The robot you control is called an Espire Model 1. Digital Load say their locomotion system will eliminate motion sickness for almost everyone. They expect the game will release sometime in 2019. A title that I was late to the races on, but have been spending a lot of makeup time on, is Beat Saber. Well, the studios behind Beat Saber, Beat Game Studios, say their multiplayer component is 85% done. They expect to launch that component shortly after the launch of the PlayStation VR version. Be really interesting to see how the multiplayer version plays out. Back in the 80s, there was an arcade game called Marble Madness that saw you navigating a marble through various isometric obstacle courses. Fast forward to now, and we have ARCA'S Path, which takes the spirit of Marble Madness and brings it into VR. You play the part of a young girl who finds a VR video game in a trash heap. You move the ball in the game around with head movements via your HMD's head tracking. The game is going to launch globally on December 4th for PlayStation VR, Vive, Rift, Oculus Go, Gear VR, and Windows VR headset. Kudos to developer Dream Reality Interactive for doing what I would call a truly global release, not just in regions, but essentially across all platforms. Boxing game Creed Rise to Glory will include PvP multiplayer when it launches in a few days, according to developer Servios. They confirm multiplayer is going to be available on all platform versions of the game. However, crossplay is only going to be enabled between Steam and the Oculus Store versions. Now, I didn't stress this much last time, but the devs behind this, Servios, they of raw data fame, they have a history of delivering polished VR products. This is a title I'm really excited about. Absolutely cannot wait. The latest update to Karnage Chronicles, a game on my top 20 list, sees it receiving 4-player co-op support. Enemy monsters will scale according to the number of people in the co-op party. If you're interested in an action RPG light experience, definitely a title to try. It's extremely polished and an absolute blast to play. I'm going to be doing some multiplayer, and I'll let you all know my thoughts within a few days. Alright guys, let's talk about the RTX lineup of cards. I've had so many questions on these, and thankfully we've started to see a lot of benchmarks flying in. Jay's 2 cents, Linus Tech, Digital, etc. There's a lot of benchmarks that start to paint the picture of what you should do. If you've got, and I'm going to say up front, if you've got anything less than a 1080 Founders Edition, you can't go wrong with either. It's really a question of how much you want to spend. If you don't want to spend a lot of money, you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait for those interim cards, right? The inevitable 2060s or 2070s, and see how the performance is there. If you're okay with spending the money, you're going to get a performance boost from your 970, your 980, or if you've got AMD cards, for sure. Where it gets a little murky is if you've got 1080s. So like my Founders Edition, and we'll take a look at that shortly when we look at the benchmarks, or if you've got a 1080 Ti. 4K, it starts to walk away with performance, the RTX cards that is. 1080p, not so much. And remember, a lot of the current VR rendering is still 1080p based. We really haven't pushed up to 4K, with units yet. The Pimax, one of the first that's going to be testing that out. So let's take a look at the benchmarks. I'll show you what I mean. So a couple of titles. We've got Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider. You can see if you've got a Founders Edition like me, at 1080p, you really can't go wrong with either the 2080 Founders or the 2080 Ti. But my argument would be if you're going to spend the money, don't bother with the Founders Edition. Spend a few $100 more, get the 2080 Ti. Again, that's if you've got a 1080 Founders Edition, because you can see the benchmarks, 93 up to 128 at 1080p for Shadow, 32 at 4K, up to 58 at 4K on the Ti, essentially doubling your performance. And we're going to look at another series of tables that I've done that shows you the percentage difference in a second. Where it becomes a little murkier, guys, is if you've got a 1080 Ti. I'm going to say right off the bat, I don't think the 2080 Founders Edition is a good purchase if you've got a 1080 Ti. Sure, it's a bit better at 4K, and you might be able to make the argument that, I'm getting a Pimax, it's going to serve me better there, but not really. For example, 1080 Ti, Shadow, 4K, 42 frames per second. That only goes up to 45 on the 2080 Founders Edition. Remember, these are average frame rates. Metro last night, 64 to 67. Ghost Recon Wildlands, 53 to 55. Hitman, which is probably the biggest difference, 74 to 80 frames per second. That's still only 6 frames per second. We're talking about 4% performance increase. Not worth it. If you've got a 1080 Ti, the 2080 Ti really your only choice. And I would make the same argument, but slightly different. If you've got a 1080 Founders Edition like me, get the 2080 Ti. You might as well spend a bit more and get that much more performance. So let's take a look at the percentage differences, guys. You can see here 2080 Founders versus 2080 FE. The range in performance difference at 1080p is 7 to 28% versus the Founders Edition. So 1080 versus 2080 Founders. That's at 1080p. At 4K, the difference is between 34% and 59%. So still not crazy. However, when we start looking at the 2080 Ti, a lot bigger of a difference. For example, we're ranging from 13% all the way up to 38% at 1080p, but at 4K, that's where the difference really shines. We're going from 65%, guys, to 103%. So let's look at some VR benchmarks. You can see here the same 4 cards. Baseline, let's assume the 2080 Ti is baseline. VR Mark Blue Room, the Founders Edition is 23% slower. The Ti 1080 39, the 1080 Founders Edition 53% slower. On Steam VR, almost the same. The 2080 Founders is 14%, 1080 Ti 28% slower, and the Founders Edition 46% slower. So you can see pretty much the same story. So let's talk about that. So really what I get out of those guys is if you've got the 1080 Ti, the Founders Edition of the 2080, I wouldn't even consider it because you're going to spend that much more money for not that much improvement. The 2080 Ti is still going to see a bit of a jump, particularly at 4K. If you're okay with spending the amount, you're going to get that immediate performance. If you're not happy with those benchmarks based on the amount you have to pay, wait for the 7 nanometer. You're still going to be able to ride this generation out. Remember, we have seen no RTX apps. We've seen the cheesy Final Fantasy one, which was highly controlled and highly controversial. And titles like Battlefield, we're not going to see those benchmarks for RTX until November. And Tomb Raider, likewise, it's a patch that hasn't even been released yet, probably October for that one. So you are going to have to buy this card purely based on the benchmarks that I've shown you. Conventional gaming, Pancake, and VR. If RTX is a reason for it, hold on. Don't pre-order. Don't purchase now. Wait. But if, like me, you got the 1080 Founders Edition, you really can't go wrong. But I'm going to make the argument, don't go for the 2080 Founders Edition. Spend a few $100 more. Get the Ti. You get that much more performance out of it. It will be night and day for us Founders Edition 1080 owners. Let me know, guys, what your thoughts are on these cards, particularly the nonsense with RTX when there's nothing really to benchmark against. We have nothing. Really, the argument could have been made they should have waited probably until the start of 2019 to release these cards. Allow RTX to at least be available to test to kind of gauge performance. So a little cheesy in that respect. Love to hear your guys' thoughts. All right, guys, with that said, another episode draws to a close. Appreciate all the support. Hit that like button, guys, if you like this video. Leave a comment below. It really helps this video get out there to as many people as possible. Guys, have a fantastic weekend, what's left of it, and a great week. As always, cheers.